All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. And I'll say it and I'll continue to say it because selfishly, as I mention all the time, I can have anyone I want on this show. And today I'm super excited to have a friend, someone that I've been following for a very, very long time. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Quartez Harris. I am a poet. I am a dad. I am a former teacher, still educator though. I taught second grade. Still love the children. And I'm a voracious reader, and I love to write when the muse allows me to.
Like you mentioned before you came on, and I hope it's okay that I mentioned this, that you were in the process of also getting married. So I just want to congratulate you on
Yes,
that. Yeah.
yes,
And
yes.
how are things so far? And yeah, tell me about the process so
Okay,
far.
so yeah, I like to tell stories, so that's my mean. So I'm gonna tell it this way. I'm gonna highlight it this way. So yesterday, me and my fiance spent the evening roaming around Cleveland, Ohio, looking for green booths. And what I mean by green booths is we are on the front cover of Cleveland Scene, which is a large, physical magazine, platform here, no, local news, whatnot, in Cleveland. Yeah, and we are featured on the front cover because yeah, we are both literary individuals. We have our own literary studio on the west side of town, but someone thought we were interesting enough, and it was like, hey, we want to have you guys come out and want to interview you and follow you around for 8 months. So yeah, we saw our physical selves on a magazine, and we're on the front cover, and it's apparently it says, we are poet couple is on the rise. But I love that
Uh,
I could feel like I am on the rise with my beloved partner.
wow, dude, that is so dope, and I think it's so cool. I mentioned this, but I have so many questions for
Hmm.
you. But I think it's so cool that both of you are uh, educators, literary
Hmm.
people, book people,
Yeah.
because my wife is also an
Wow.
educator, a writer, etc. And I can speak to you about this because you know exactly how I feel when I say this. Like to have someone that just understands,
Yes.
you know, the literary part of you,
Yes.
the writing part of you,
Yes.
the reading part of you, it really helps.
Yes.
It really, really
It
helps.
feels
Okay.
like a mutual meetings of minds. Yeah.
Right, right. It does definitely make life easier.
Absolutely.
My first question, and I always ask this, is tell me about Little Q.
Oh,
Tell me about Little Q.
you know, okay, little Q. I think he'll be proud of me right now. But I say this because my earliest relationship with myself, I felt was marked
Hmm.
by shame. I couldn't read, couldn't spell. In fact, I remember this guy named Joe Kennerly. I was envious of him because he was a spelling bee champ, right? I remember wanting to be just like him, and he sort of conquered language in a way, right? And I had an IEP, and poor reading comprehension, poor writing expression, and I was in these sort of non-standardized classrooms. But I do remember in second grade, which is for me, it's a significant moment to be able to reflect on being a to be a second grade teacher because that was when I first was introduced to my own sort of limitations around language. And so I have a sensitivity to young people who are struggling with language, struggling with decoding language. But I remember, everybody had 20 spelling words, I only had five. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I remember being pulled out of classrooms, and so I remember just wanting to sort of be validated. I wanted my mind to be validated, but I felt like people were sort of challenging my mind in the sense of like, oh wow, it's not working, right? I felt like my mind was non-functional, and so now to think back, now that I'm writing, right, it's like it's super weird. But I will say that those earlier moments, I think they sort of yielded these sort of like instinctive reactions that I have sometimes. I'm like, I can't do it. I
Sure.
can't write, and I'm still sort of trying to reassure little Cortez, like, there's still possibilities for you. You still can use language. Yeah. So yeah, that's
Hmm.
my earliest childhood is really sort of a mirage of just all these differences, these moments of feeling different.
Wow. Wow, and I think that's so interesting because I can hear. I was going to ask you how has that influenced the way you care for kids and your appreciation to the idea around empathy
Hmm.
because that's when you're talking about your experience. You are now showing
Mm,
empathy to those other kids, and I think that's so important.
yeah.
It's shout out to the unicorns. Patrick Harris always used to talk about how us as elementary teachers or just black
Mm,
educators in general, sorry, are just unicorns,
yes.
and there's very few of us.
Mm.
Tell me a little bit about your experience just being a black male educator in
Ooh,
general.
let's unpack that. Let's unpack that. You know, when I was an educator for 6 years, it wasn't until my last year I worked with a African American male, meaning the only time I had an African American colleague was the last year of my sort of term as an educator.
Mhm.
This black man, unfortunately, didn't feel supported and left education. So that was very troubling. I felt very under supported. I felt, but there was also a sense of like closeness I felt like I got with parents because I was at a single race school. Essentially, all the student body was virtually all black. All the teachers were white, right? So I felt like when adults came into the room, they wanted to be around my classroom. And I remember walking down the hallway one day, and a parent sort of whispered to their child and said, "Oh my gosh, you have a black male teacher." So I'm grateful that I was sort of like a intellectual model or intellectual possibility um, as a black male figure, right? And ultimately, I just want to say that there was a sense of pride in being black in education. I remember
Yep.
being excited to tell people like this was my vocation at the time. I remember being excited that I had, I could walk in class, so I had my locks. Sometimes I walked in with my hat on, my sneakers, my tie, and just sort of giving kids is sort of a window into like, wow, like you can also be a professional, but you also can be real to your identity, right? And a lot of my kids, I feel like I look like their uncles,
Yeah. Yeah.
or they're, what I'm saying, they're cousins, right? And so it was sort of for me, it felt very sort of contained in this sort of like, okay, wow, like I am in this space and I'm grateful to be in this space, but I still feel marginalized. I still feel like there's not enough of us. I don't like feeling like a
Hmm.
unicorn in that sense. I feel like there should be more representation of black individuals in sort of these brick and mortar schools. So there was still sort of like I felt like cognitive dissonance a little bit. It's like, oh my gosh, like I like that I'm this black figure in the space, but why is it just me? Why are there not more?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting that you talk about being at an all black school in regards to like the kids and the
Yeah.
population, and then having white teachers.
Mm.
And I admit my connection to that is I've been teaching at international schools where the population is, these kids are from everywhere, like kids from Korea, kids from Japan, black kids, white kids, kids that are coming from like the Middle East, like all these different kids. And then when you look at the faculty,
Mm,
the expectation would be that your faculty represents your students.
mm,
And I will say, like the specific school that I'm in now, there is they have been the best school that I've been at, where there is, there's a good amount, not enough, but a good amount, probably more than what I've seen in my past in regards to this teachers looking like their students,
mm,
but there's still not enough.
mm.
If all of your students, all of your students come from all these different places, your teachers should come from all these different places,
Right. That part. That
right?
part.
You know what I mean? So I can totally understand how you feel because when I have had those black kids in my class, it makes the world of a difference, and you can tell like right away. So, I mean, I agree. The unicorn phase is so interesting because there's not very many of us out there. How do you retain us as well?
And
Right?
something else that happens is sort of when my kids entered my classroom on the first day, it's like they were kind of shocked.
Mm,
Are we in the right classroom? You know, because a lot of them didn't have that experience of having prior to
yeah,
me having a black male teacher, and even their parents.
yeah,
Sometimes parents mistake me for a student. And
Yeah.
it's like, it's interesting that when you are in that position to teach young and black brown children, or children at, of any race, there is an assumption that, like, wait, are you supposed to be here?
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
does affirm possibilities when, I think for my students to see me in front of them and around them and with them and playing with them, that, like, wow, like, I can be this too. It's much more
Yeah.
deeper connection when you can feel like you can, like, visceral, experience yourself through someone else, right? Just because they look like
Hmm.
you.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Because we all remember the teachers who have
Oh
influenced
yeah,
us the most. For me specifically, like those teachers were teachers of
there you
color.
go.
They look like me. They've had experiences like me. They're able to relate to me in certain ways. They know, like, it. It. They knew my parents. They knew my
Yeah,
cousins. All that stuff made a huge difference. And not having that for kids, like, I mean, you miss out on an opportunity,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
You really miss out on an opportunity. So I want to talk to you a little bit about. I mean, this, again, there's a lot. I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions. So let's start first. If we can, let's start with first. We made it to school alive,
Okay.
um, and let's talk a little bit about the inspiration behind that and the work that was put in to create this beautiful collection. And I mean beautiful because, like, every piece of that really speaks to my soul. So for those of you who don't know, I'll let you talk about it, but let's talk about we made it to school alive first.
Yes. So yeah, we made the school alive is a poetry collection that sort of spans um, my time as an educator in East Cleveland, Glenville, a under resourced school, a under resource environment, right? It's a impoverished environment. So I do recall on my first day interviewing for the school, my sort of first reaction was like, it looks like a prison.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
I remember having a bit of trepidation about being in this physical space because it didn't feel real to me. I'm like, wait, there are brick and mortars that mirror prisons, right? And that sort of like rattled me a bit. But when I started the year, it was. I remember a teacher telling me, like, do not smile on the first day of school. Do not show your smile. Do not flash a smile, and that concerned me
Wow.
because at that point I felt like you want me to sort of diminish, my sort of identity because I know me being here matters, right? And I feel like also I love to smile, right? And I want kids to feel welcome. And I remember like really being sort of like interested in why would she sort of communicate that to me. So I inquired about like what was her rationale for telling me this, and she said, you know what? If you smile, they're not going to take you serious. They're going to run all over you. So there is a sense of like, if you show who you are fully, they will not identify you, or they will identify you as someone not to be taken serious with, right? And I thought like, wow, like I feel like my presence alone, people will sort of embrace me. Whether I smile or not, I feel like it's important. It's for me essential to me that I show them that I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be an intellectual model. I'm happy to be someone that they can identify with. And I remember, like, I'm being honest, I remember smiling and kind of having a sense of fear of like, or concern or anxiety of like, okay, is she right? You know, is she right? This is my first time sort of teaching in this capacity. And to come to find out, these children, just me smiling, choosing to smile on the first day of school, I really felt like I wasn't challenged. I was embraced by children. And I think that experience for me, or I guess you can say, so I use my smile as a metaphor, it sort of opened them up a little bit. And I
Wow.
recall my classroom environment being a very playful environment. Kids really having a level of enthusiasm to read, enthusiasm to sort of read even when they're struggling with decoding words. Right? It was like wasn't a perfect environment, but it was very much a real classroom where kids got upset, they got angry, but they were happy that we reconciled. We attuned each other. And I felt like my kids, we celebrated reading, before we even started the class when we were dancing and singing Harambe chants, and literally celebrating sort of reading and our imaginations, our unique selves. And I did that over the course of six years. And to this day, I still go back to my school because I still have relationships with some of my former students, and they're much taller than me, right? But I really felt like I left an imprint just because I chose to spend most of my time in the classroom smiling. You know, chose to spend most of my time in my classroom breathing, right? Trying not to be so reactive because I knew a lot of teachers were just frustrated with sort of when we can talk about that in another episode, right? Sort of with the infrastructure of schools and just sort of the school system as it is. But I felt like, right now, all I have right now is my sensitivity to language, to my sensitivity to learning, and I'm going to use it to my advantage. And also my sensitivity to the fact that, like, wow, like they may never get a black male education in anytime soon after me.
Yeah.
So back to your question of remade school life, it's really me documenting my experience, but also just documenting experience such as kids who will come to me and they talk to me about gun violence. Kids will talk to me about how they didn't have any heating. Their house was really hot or cold. Um,
Hmm.
Kids who just talked about like being hungry. Kids who talked about being afraid to walk to school. So it was really sort of a collection of just some of the things that I was curious about, some of the things I've heard and I've seen while teaching in the public educational space.
And I don't know if we can get deep into this, but we could try. So I had like the educational system seems to present systemic challenges with factors like overcrowded classrooms and teachers having like, to just overwork themselves in general. Like in your view, what are some of the root causes like for these issues?
Mm.
What are some of the changes that need to happen or are already happening some places so students are being supported and at the same time teachers are being supported? And schools talk about mental health all the time. At least our schools, they do. Do they do a good job of it? I don't know because I still find that burnout is real, and I
Mm.
find like teachers are being overworked. Um, and I know for a lot of friends of mine that are teaching specifically in North America, they're also not getting paid their due as
Mhm.
well. So, what do you think about some of the changes that might have to happen in order for teachers to stay in the teaching profession and for students to be a little bit more supported?
Yeah, I think um, one thing that we must grapple with, and I know it sounds a bit trite, but teachers, there is a reality of you know having an experience of unearning, under
Yeah.
earning. I
Hmm.
think I, as a personally as a teacher, I remember, I didn't make that much annually, but I remember sort of scrapping up money to just, provide my students sort of with a hands-on learning experience. I
Hmm.
remember, setting up, donor shoes and have to wait, maybe like a month for it to be fully funded before I can actually go out and buy the sort of the activities that I felt that would ensure that my classroom was sort of like a creative, imaginative space.
Wow.
I remember, teachers sort of have to get like so creative, which also kind of sort of impeded sort of their time to sort of reprieve. It's like you have to sort of build up these sort of classroom systems, or creative systems so that you can actually have a sort of a print imaginary rich environment, which might means you spend a little bit more time cutting, you know, you spend a
Hmm.
little bit more time, trying to figure out imaginary ways of sort of to ensure engagement, which there
Hmm.
may be like here in Cleveland, Ohio, you have Lakeshore Learning, where it's all these really cool activity based games, and kids don't even realize they're learning because they're having so much fun, right? And that sort of strengthens sort of the small circle learning environments, right? Or the as we describe them as center rotations, right? It's like I need funding to ensure that my kids are engaged when they are at their small group stations, right?
Hmm.
But if I don't have that, then I have to use my own means of under earning income to sort of compensate for what my kids don't have, right? And I think
Hmm.
that, in my opinion, I think that is taxing emotionally, right? It's like not only do I got to figure out how I can sort of um, d- make sure I'm well enough to be at school, but also make sure my kids are have a sense of engagement, but let's just be honest, to engage kids, we need resources. We need access to resources, right? So now you got to sort of think out the box to ensure that your kids are focused and want to be in the classroom. That's
Yeah.
one problem,
That's
is a lack
yeah.
of just resources, right? And the
Resources
other
in
problem, and to
general.
your point, is there is a sense of, if I take off, there's a sense of guilt, right?
Mm,
And you don't feel like you can sort of fully embrace feeling reprieve and restorative, because you know that, like, all right, my evaluation system may not be up to par if I'm not present, or there's going to be assumption that I'm not working hard enough, right? Or my kids may need me,
yeah.
and so it's like, I don't know, I never really fully felt off until the summertime,
Yeah.
when school pretty much just came to a complete sort of total end, right?
Hmm.
And overpopulated classrooms is a big one. A
Yeah.
lot of kids need individualized support, and it's hard to provide that sort of individualized, meet those individual needs when you have, 25 plus students in a classroom and you have no paraprofessional. So now you're
Yep.
overextending yourself in your own environment, and the kids are watching you sort of um, react as if you're on you need rest, right? Kids are like, I know, I've heard a kid say, "You are you okay?" When you got kids
They know.
asking,
Kids are aware.
when they're
Kids
asking,
are aware.
right, when they're asking you if you are okay.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. Kids are very aware. They can look and
Very intuitive.
feel all the things, regardless. Like, I mean, you taught
Yeah,
second grade. I'm teaching third grade. They can sense when something's wrong,
yeah.
right? They can sense when something's wrong. And I think you nailed it. Like, a lot of people talk about resources. I'm lucky enough to be in a school where resources aren't an issue for us.
Hmm.
They are very well resourced. I think some of the things we are working on is, you know, um, s when we're in elementary, I think it's more like systematic, where we are trying to figure out the number of teachers who are of color in the classrooms. I think the programs are pretty good. They can be more anti-bias, anti-racist, yes, but I think systemically within the school, in the structure in itself, I think the more teachers that look like the students would be better.
Mm,
Um, so it's so interesting that we are living over here and hearing stories about people who are teaching at home,
mm,
and just like how it's all connected.
it
It is
is.
all very much connected, right? I also want to spend some time talking to you about, some future things that are happening that are very, very exciting for you,
Hmm.
exciting for me too. So you have, I think it's 2025.
Yeah.
I think
2025 spring.
2025. Go tell it.
Hmm.
Story about Baldwin. Like, where? How did that happen? When did you start writing this? How did it happen? For those of you who don't know, um, Q has a book coming out. I'm gonna let him talk about it, even though I'm like gushing over the idea, the print, all the stuff. So, how did it happen? And where are you right now with it?
Yeah. So I had been studying Baldwin for almost, prior to writing the book, like a decade. And when I
Mm-hmm.
say studying Baldwin, I felt like I was studying myself, because I feel like Baldwin is so self-referential, but I feel like it's sort of his vehicle of sort of the reader, the listener, sort of to invite their own sense of awareness, and to really, in my mind, to sort of really boldly face yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, for me, Baldwin sort of represents sort of self awareness, and and I think every time I read Baldwin, I feel like I have a better sense of clarity about my own personal path, about my own personal rages, fears, the state of the world, right? So I feel like Baldwin sort of turned my eyes where I otherwise would not be looking. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I think Baldwin. And I was raised in an apostolic church, so the sort of, I know there was my experience of Christianity, and just trying to process that. So those emotions, right? Toxic Christianity, um, and sort of, I feel like Baldwin really gave me a sense of like, okay, this is your experience, but this is another way you can look at it. This is another way you can revisit it. In terms of how I decided to write the book, I have an agent named Tanya McKinney, and initially I intended on writing a middle grade novel. That's I love prose, I love fiction. Although I'm a poet, I think of myself as I use poetry to work out my prose.
Mm-hmm.
But we were going back and forth, and I wasn't ready. Truth is, I wasn't ready. I still needed to develop my craft because I never wrote a novel before. I mean, I feel like writing a novel. I'm a poet, but writing a novel, I feel like I was teaching myself how to write again. But I
Mm.
noticed that the more I would read Baldwin's writing, I ended up learning that he was a poet himself. So that fascinated me. And I also learned that he would use poetry to work out his prose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Baldwin is, and I think of his writing, I think of images, right? And I'm like, I read a lot of, different picture book biographies. A lot of them, for me, it was um, declarative sentences, such as straightforward sentences, which is fine, that narrative is fine. But I was like, what if I wrote a biography where it's pretty much loosely based around poetry? Like I want to use sort of like my language abilities through poetry to sort of tell this sort of account of this my literary hero. Everyone's literary hero is James Baldwin, and then I was really fascinated with sort of Baldwin's relationship with his family, and I was like this whole image of Baldwin holding a book in one hand and his siblings in the other. Baldwin, and if you pay attention to Baldwin's earliest work, he focused his earliest work is earlier work is filled with his childhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Baldwin is always trying to get us to see the child within the adult, right? So I was like, let me just focus on his childhood. I mean, we all know Baldwin, the adult, Jimmy with the cigarette dangling from his lips, the arresting speaker. But what about James Baldwin, the kid who read every book in the Harlem Library? He felt if I could just read every book in the Harlem Library, I enter any building in the world, right? So I wanted to sort of like focus on that with more of a lyrical arc. Like for example, the first line is, I could have said, James Baldwin loved words, but how could I use a poetry device to describe his affinity for language? So maybe, how about this? The first time James Baldwin read a book, the words clung to him like glitter, right? So you have sort of like sort of like that sort of queer mirage of like, the glitter, and I just wanted to just sort of evoke Jimmy the child in the conscience of young
Yes.
people.
Yes. I love that. I love that. Wow. How long did it take you to get? And I love talking about process because I think everyone has their own process in how they write and how they create. How long did it take you to get to from the agent phase to the manuscript phase to the contract
Wow, I
phase?
know, right? So I always think of my journey as sort of chaotic. I
Mm,
do, and I think this is the importance of like when we have sort of these opportunities and platforms to sort of also center other people. And someone took the time to sort of We Made It School Alive, and they took up on themselves to share it with my agent now, Tanya McKinney, who then read my work and was apparently felt that my writing was very much at the heart was for children, and felt that that I could actually write a middle grade novel, and I'm like, what? And actually, I was trying to write an adult fiction project, and she said, "How about we just petition you for adult fiction later? Let's focus on the middle grade part." But yeah, so someone referred my work to Tanya. Tanya then we were just brainstorming, going back and forth with a novel project. That wasn't ready, so I just I was started thinking about my experience as an educator. I'm like, you know what? There are no books on Baldwin. There are none.
mm-hmm.
There are no picture biographies on Baldwin. We have Sojourning Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ruby. We have Malcolm X. Nelson Mandela, Ruby Bridges. But there are no books on picture book on Baldwin at the time. Now there is now.
Mm-hmm.
Which just came out in January of this past January. Um, and so at the time when I had submitted my work, there was nothing out there. And so I was really thinking about my students. Was like, I feel like my students deserve to have an introduction to Baldwin. So
Mm.
I wrote a Baldwin biography, a lot of research. Went to Paris, believe it or not. We went to St. Paul events, hung out in the
Wow,
cobblestones, and got to see the dictionary he used. Got to see his typewriter. Hung out in Paris, and it was went to some of the same cafes he went to.
that's
Listened to
incredible.
people who happened to like party up with Baldwin, much older now.
That's incredible.
It was, yeah, and I wrote this novel, submitted to my agent, and she said, "This is it." And
Wow.
we and it was a series of rounds of editing, because as you know, writing is rewriting, and
Mhm.
to my I feel like I was since lucky in a sense. We put it out there, and and Little Brown reached out and they said, his work, Cortez's work is staggering. At the time, I didn't know what that word meant. It's my favorite word now. I looked it up. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. All right, that's a compliment. And once my agent said Little Brown was interested in it, Scholastics reached out and it went up to auction, and it was 11 editor auction. And then
Wow.
Little Brown was the only publisher that offered me a book deal that involved a middle grade novel. So
Wow.
it's a 3 book deal, 2 picture books and a middle grade novel. And the
Wow.
middle grade novel is slated to come out the fall of 2025.
Mhm.
So yeah, right. But we know that
That's
stuff like that can be pushed back. Who knows, right? So yeah, I'm
of course.
actively editing that right now. My second draft is due in June 5th. The day. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So yeah, it's still writing for me is it's a complicated process. I'm still learning my process. I learned that I write better in the morning.
Yeah.
I learned that I need to read before I start writing to source my language.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and and reading for me, it kind of gives me almost like a template for the level of rigor or quality writing I'm aiming for, and I read the things that I love,
Mm.
and that
Ooh, I
kind of
love that idea.
yeah, and that sort of fuels my sort of creativity, and so I'll read a chapter and then I'll start writing, and then when
I
I get stuck,
love
I'll
that.
read again.
Wow.
So reading is very much something that I feel like is transformative for me, to
Uh-huh.
ensure that sort of give me sort of that creative, like, I guess you could say, verb to just focus on, like, okay, all right, they can, like for example, Jacqueline Wilson's. I love Jacqueline Wilson's writing. She's a very lyrical writer. She writes in prose, but her poems are very, visual. So I would read a lot of Wilson's work just to kind of get going
Mhm.
and just to feel like, okay,
Mhm.
I can do it too, right?
Mhm. Mhm. I think that's such a smart idea because we know the giants that came before
Oh
us
yeah,
and the work that they've done, and we can easily be inspired by looking at their work.
yeah.
I think that's such a good idea. I think oftentimes when I feel not necessarily writer's block or I feel tired or I'm just a little bit unsure of like where my writing's going, I will read. I think I like the idea of just reading purposefully for like more
Yeah,
inspiration or
yeah.
to remind yourself, and that could mean it's not necessarily something that you just have in your stack. It could be something that you've already read,
Hmm.
or it is something that is going to motivate you
Yeah.
to just believe again,
Hmm.
because it's not easy to sit specifically with
Yes.
a picture book. I think it can be. I mean, I can't count the number of times where I spent a day changing like 2
Yep.
lines.
Yep. Yep.
And you're like, you look at the time and you're like, it's afternoon and you're still reworking
Yeah.
2 lines.
Yeah. I think we need to just hold up and just and we're both picture book writers. Picture books are really hard to write. I mean, I know you have the economy of language, but it's like you feel like every single word matters. You have no room. There's no margin of error, right? And it's like you're just moving one word. You're just like you're moving these words around. You hoping they complement each other. They may not. It's just really hard to do.
It
That's why I
is.
think
It
children should be
is.
writing picture books. We should leave it to
They
children to do it.
I agree. I totally agree. It is. I mean, I knew that writing was hard. I knew that it would take time. I think when I got to the phase where we were just working at a few different sections, working at a few different words and or phrases, I didn't realize because sometimes your editor would be like, "Okay, well, we have to do something with this specific part,"
Hmm.
but you feel like in your heart, it's like, I don't have anything left.
Yes.
Like this is this. I thought this was
Yes.
the one, or I thought this
Yes.
was the part. And I mean, I felt like at the time my editor did the right thing by she kept pushing me, saying, "Well,
Mm.
like spend some time with it, see how you feel." write down some like flash drafts or do whatever you need to, because I did end up finding what it needed. But at
Mm.
the time I was like, I was stressed. I was like, I don't know if I have anything left for this book.
Isn't it fascinating to hear your experience, how we look at books on display and they appear to be sort of
Mm,
this product that wasn't really worked upon, or you don't really
mm,
see the rigor in that process.
mm.
And
It's so
oftentimes
true.
when there's a book on display, you only see the writer, you don't see sort of the editor in the background, in the backstory, right? So like, would you say
Mhm.
that sort of having sort of this like, what was your relationship with your editor? I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was super grateful. My editor at the time was Donna Bray, and I have a new editor now for my second book.
Okay, second.
But
All right,
Donna,
on the horizon.
second book coming, second book. So one of the things I really enjoyed about Donna was that I think it was the idea of just like knowing the buttons to push.
Mm,
Um, and not allowing me to settle for even phrases or lines that either looked good or sound good. She really
that part.
encouraged me
That part.
to find the heart of like the moments. And if there was no heart there, we would take it
That
out,
part.
and she would ask me to really dig and see what else is there. And she said one of the things that she felt I did well was like making things specific to my experience,
Mm,
but also like very universal. And like I didn't even know I was really doing that at the time, but as she was like explaining it to me, it made me like think more about the different moments that I wanted to express through the story. And I mean, it was a whole learning process for me because I had never had my first editor is my wife. Like I'll
likewise.
send her everything, right? And she'll critique and she'll give me ideas, and I'll get revisions back from my editor, and then I'll make some edits and I'll give it back to my wife. Like
Wow, this
those,
sounds
she
like
was
my
my
experience.
first. The same thing, same jam, the same jam,
Yep, same job. We have in-house editors.
right? And they're amazing,
Yes, they
and they're
are.
amazing, right? And they're amazing. So I think our relationship was great in the sense where she really pushed me, and she did say like there are moments where like there's lines that if there's lines that you are like very, very, attached to, and I mean, she said like that happens. Like you can obviously talk about that, and we can have conversation around that. But before we get there, she said, really think about whether or not, like, is this moving the story? Is there anything else? And that was hard for me because I really, you know, the book was finished, and then I think we revised it for almost like a year and some after, like a year and a half almost after I had signed the contract as well. So you're like, oh, is it ever gonna come out? But
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The delays, right? And I want to comment on that. Is so true as far as like, um because you're a poet, clearly, right?
mm,
And we do, and not even just writers. Sometimes we sort of, I don't know, like we over identify with a line, and we're like, this
yeah,
is the line, and we are gripping on that line. We don't want to let it go. We don't want to lose it. We don't want to release it, right? And sometimes that's hard to separate yourself from a musical line. Maybe it's a line that you're like, I came up with that. I don't want to see it go. And and I feel like I've had my editor has made the same comments, or sort of my sort of peers or people I sort of reach out for feedback is like, tell the story.
mm,
The story, it needs to move. It needs to move forward, right? Like,
mm,
and I
mhm,
remember, was it oh, what's the writer's name? Jasmine, not Jasmine Ward, Jada Smith. She said, if we only reduce good writing to a to a line, like sentence by sentence, that's not story, right?
mm,
And there are wonderful books out there, and you won't be able to appreciate the story if you're only focusing on the musicality of a sentence. So the musicality of a sentence does not constitute or make, it doesn't sort of evolve the book, the story does. So
mhm.
now that's something that I'm still learning. Like, I'm working on it in the middle grade now, and I am someone who, I love a lyrical line. And it's like line by line. I want you to see something, but it's like, but what's happening? move this.
Same.
Sometimes you're mistaking story for description or visuals.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, I just wanted to
Yes.
comment on your editorial process because I think again, readers, if you're not a writer, but you're just someone who they're not aware of the process, you just it may look like we as writers are. This is a very maroon experience, but it
Mm-hmm.
involves many minds of many people.
It does. It does. And it takes, all the, I don't want to call it stress because I
Hmm.
do believe that it's like it's a stress that I've always wanted to be in this position.
Mm,
So I hate using the word stress. But it does challenge you to think about things differently.
it
Uh,
does.
yeah, I don't want to, at times I think I've identified it as stress, but again, I don't, it's hard because I've always wanted to be in a position where I can share my words, and now I'm like able to do it. So I think I'd rather say it was more of a challenge and
Mm,
something that really stretched my thinking at the time. Because now I feel better about when the edits come back or when I have to rethink things. Like I know that I know I can get there.
I can
I
get. I
now
like
know that
that.
yeah, I now feel like I can make it to the point of like changing something or feeling good about it versus like initially knowing like, oh my gosh, like I don't know where to go.
Mm.
Um, and I think that has just come through that practice with that first one, to be honest, because the first one was like okay, but then the second one was like second one's always the hardest. Is
Yeah.
always the hardest.
Someone
Yeah.
told me that sort of think of sort of the editorial sort of process or the editorial component of writing as a conversation. And you
Hmm.
mentioned and you mentioned stress, and I learned this recently. There's this term called eustress, which is a
Mm.
positive form of stress that has like these healthy benefits such as motivation. You know,
Hmm.
and it makes so like
Hmm.
there so like yeah we are impacted by stress, but we're also impacted by positive stress because we get to do the thing like Kyrie was saying that we love.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I think that's also true. Couple more questions. Um, what what do you feel your ultimate goal as a writer will be in the future?
Man. Um, ooh, that's a really really good question. Something I'm always thinking about is and this I didn't say this is a quote and it's a
Hmm.
statement of I don't know what I feel until I read.
Hmm.
Um, and I also want people to feel like they're not alone.
Hmm.
I think at times, it's you can feel lonely and you feel like, no one understands, and but then you pick up a book and you're like, wait a minute. It's like, hmm, let me revisit that statement. In
Hmm.
fact, I'm not as hollowed out as I once thought. I'm not as empty. I'm not as alone. There are real experiences, figurative experiences, that very much center sort of my reality, such as I mentioned the comment of your sort of your book, and there were certain scenes that made me think about like, my childhood, right? And you think I'm the only one eating bologna sandwiches, deep fried bologna sandwiches, and it's like and that's a metaphor for a lot of different things. We don't have to dive into that, but there is a sense of like I want people to come away from my work and feeling like they have a deeper sense of who they are, but
Hmm.
also I want people to come to my work and realize like wow, like I am not, you know, on this. I'm not experiencing this world alone. I am
Hmm.
not experiencing sort of my stress, my traumas, my fears, my anxieties alone. Though I may feel that
Hmm.
way, and that's valid too to feel that way, but to sort of have that sort of reassurance that you know what, like I know you right now. You feel lonely, but yet there is a breath of many other people who are breathing just like you, who are thinking just like you, who feel just like you. So yeah, I want people to step away and just kind of sort of have a better sense of who they are, and how they feel, and to not feel diminished, and not
I
feel
love
invalidated because they feel a
hmm
certain type of way.
I love that. To feel like they're not alone.
Hmm.
I mean, that is isn't that the goal for all
Yeah.
writers to help readers and people feel like they're not alone? Like that's what books do, right?
Hmm.
Books are supposed to connect
Yeah.
humans, connect them to different worlds and experiences, etc. You're doing it. I'm excited for you. I am so excited for you.
Likewise.
I can't wait to see what you continue to do. And I appreciate all the gifts that you continue to share with us, and more that we'll continue to share throughout your career. So, where can people find you online?
Yeah. So, according to my mom, if you Google my name, spelled Cortez,
Shut up.
Quartez, like quarter, you take off the R, you add a Z, Harris, Harris. A article of me somewhere will pop up, and you can learn a little bit more about me. But me and my fiance are featured in a magazine called Cleveland Scene. If you just type in my name, her name is Courtney Morrow. She's a writer too. You'll find us roaming the internet somewhere.
You do that's so true though, because actually I was on your website like a while
Uh huh.
ago. Before I did that, I put it in Google, and you have a lot of articles
Yeah.
online.
Well, local articles, local, local.
Regardless, it's a lot of
Yeah,
articles.
it feels, yeah. Yeah, right. So yeah, you can definitely Google me. It's not enough to have a Wikipedia page, but it's enough to have a
Yeah,
thumbprint.
no, you are doing amazing work,
Likewise.
and I appreciate you so
And
much.
before we go off the call, I just want to say, Gary, I really I watching your videos and I know you had sort of created like almost like a vlog. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, yeah.
Of sort of the process. It really helped me to sort of like find joy in celebrating my process, and it really helped me to celebrate myself. I think I'm
Mm,
someone who I'm a compulsive striver. If I conquer one goal, I'm on to the next. I don't really visit the moment while I'm in it. So seeing you celebrate your moment, it's like I was so happy to support you, which is why I ran out and bought 10 books from my local
you
publisher.
really
I sure
did.
did, because I wanted to express. That was my way of expressing my gratitude, and I passed around to children. And so, thank you for
Thank,
celebrating. I'm looking forward to seeing your literary future continue to shine. And yeah, and likewise, likewise.
thank you. And you know what?